Welcome back. You with the India Development Debate second edition. The Trump administration is hitting India where it really hurts. Now, within a week after the US President slammed New Delhi, asserting that India is not doing a favor by slashing the import duty on Harley Davidson bikes, the office of the US Trade Representative has now dragged India to the World Trade Organization. According to the USTR, most of the Indian government's export subsidy programs, including the SEZ capital goods scheme, are nothing but protectionist under the garb of business promotion. US Trade Rep Robert Lighthizer did say that such moves could adversely impact American workers by creating an uneven playing field.
Washington claims that India gives away financial incentives worth over $7 billion annually by way of export incentives. Remember, last week, Trump administration kicked off a fresh trade war globally, mainly targeted at Beijing and EU by announcing steep import tariffs on steel and aluminium. Although the move will have only limited impact on India, experts warn that India will be caught in the crossfire between Washington and Beijing, and this could in turn hurt the domestic industry hard. The fresh salvo from the Trump administration in the trade war against India, that's what we're discussing tonight on the India Development Debate. Joining us are three very special guests: Ambassador K.C. Singh, former diplomat. We've got Ajay Sahai, DG and CEO at the Federation of Indian Exporters Organization. Dr. Ajay Dua, former DIPP Secretary, also joins in on the show. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us here at ET. Now, Ambassador Singh, I want to start off with you. While trade disputes between India and US are not uncommon, how surprised are you at the timing and audacity of this one? I mean, after having turned blatantly protectionist, the US is today practically challenging India's entire trade policy. And this move comes in the context of some pretty nasty and what some may call patronizing comments made by Donald Trump in reference to India, with regards to the Harley Davidson case. How are you reading all this at a time when diplomats go to no length describing how wonderful India-US, our trade ties are, how wonderful strategic partners we are, and then the US does this to us?
Look, where trade deficit is concerned, in case of Trump, I don't think he reserves nastiness for any single country. He can be nasty with anyone. He was nasty with Canada, with his NAFTA partners, Mexico and Canada, even though there largely his trade is balanced. So I don't think he's taking a logical approach. This is really his domestic constituency. He's got voted in by the Rust Belt, by the white worker, and he's going to be appealing to them. So much of this is for show, as was shown that in case of Harley Davidson, their exports, Indian exports of motorbikes to America is $11 million. It's a pittance. Even if he imposed the duty, it doesn't really amount to much. But Harley Davidson becomes important for him because the plant is in the constituency of the House Speaker. So for him, it's all driven by domestic politics. Now, I would say actually going to WTO sounds nasty, but it's better than having duties imposed straight away on your products. Because in WTO, at least is accepting adjudication. You can go and talk there, and we have a chance to present a case. Now, one of the things where he's talking of value addition would be diamonds, because that's one of the largest exports. Now, I don't know whether you're importing a raw material, doing a value addition, then exporting it, where that fits into WTO, because this will be all done. This is important for something like diamonds. It may not be that important for other products. So it's the starting of something, but I don't think it's India specific. It's Trump being Trump, and you have to deal with it as it comes.
Deal with it as it comes. That's President Trump for you, catering to a domestic constituency. But like you said, at least he's going to the WTO and in some sense has some sanctity for that multilateral organization. But I'm a little enraged. And Mr. Dua, I'll ask you this question. Isn't it a bit too much that an $18.5 trillion economy that calls itself a global superpower actually resorts to using national security as a pretext to impose tariff barriers and a mega buyout deal is today showing the WTO rulebook to us?
Indeed it is, but that's what Trumponomics is all about. A famous economist, Stiglitz, he'd mentioned the day Mr. Trump became the president, that now you're going to be seeing hand grenades being thrown into the world order. And that's what we are seeing. Every second day, a statement which he doesn't necessarily follow up. But he does make these statements, and probably the details, etc., come much later. This is exactly what we are seeing in the case of his threat to impose duties varying from 10% to 25% on various items. He probably recognizes that this is going outside the WTO framework, which does not allow countries like the US to exceed the bound rates. The bound rates for items like steel and aluminum are 0. If it is zilch, I don't know how he is thinking of imposing 25% and 15% duties and yet be able to kind of go to the WTO and seek justice. There is going to be reaction from the WTO to his actions. There is going to be reaction from whole lot of countries in the world, including allies of the US, that is the EU, Japan, South Korea, all have reacted that the moment Mr. Trump puts his so-called threats into action, they would retaliate. Even the items on which they would retaliate, those have been identified, including by China, which is saying that we might be the biggest importer of soybean from the US, but we would react if the US were to impose this, the hikes which he is talking about.
But, yeah, that on the one hand, Mr. Dua, if I'm interpreting that is on the other hand, and then of course the USTR goes and makes this, audacious claim to drag India to the WTO over our own export subsidies, so-called subsidies. But Ajay, let's get the elephant out of the room, because there's a little technicality here which the US has brought to the WTO. Now, the WTO allows countries to offer export subsidies till they reach a defined economic benchmark. Now, the US claims that India reached that milestone in 2015. That itself is a little disputable, because I understand India's position is that we got there only in 2017. But the larger question is, is it America's job to decide the time frame for India to withdraw these subsidies? I mean, it has to be done in a gradual, phased manner, or is it America's job to tell the world when should India withdraw these subsidies?
No, in fact, if you look at Article 27 of Agreement on Subsidies and Countervailing Measures, where special and differential treatment has been given to the developing country, there are two clauses. Under clauses 27.2a are the countries which are Annex 7 countries, which includes India, and 27.2b are the developing countries who have graduated and who have been given 8 years time frame to abide by the discipline of WTO. So India has definitely taken the logical view that this 8 years time period would be available to India from the time it has graduated out. The issue comes in that though we have graduated out in 2017, the data was shared by WTO with us in 2017 only. So 8 years time period should reckon from 2017. And if you look into also the product competitiveness, where a share of a particular country in product exceeds 3.25% benchmark, there also the 8-year phase out is given. So taking the two together, I think we have a very strong case, though there is no dispute about that. We have graduated out of the limit of gross national income of $1,000 for 3 consecutive years, but we can still argue that we have 8 years time to phase out the subsidies, and within 8 years time we should look into bringing WTO compatible subsidies, which may be in the nature of R&D development, but may be for product competitiveness, it may be for product development, it may be for meeting the environment norms, it may be for setting up the export oriented units in the backward area, it may be for infrastructure. So if we have the time, I think we should look into how we remodel our scheme to fit into the WTO discipline.
Okay. All right. But Ambassador Singh, I frankly don't understand this notion of reciprocal trade. I mean, how can there be reciprocal trade being spoken about between an $18.5 trillion economy and a $2.5 trillion economy? We really are talking about reciprocal trade between apples and oranges, or David and Goliath, if I may.
Not only that, if you take US's overall trade, it's about exports are about 1.4 trillion and their imports are about 2.1. So there's a gap of almost $750 billion. Now, out of that, India only constitutes about 30 odd billion or 40 odd billion dollars, a very small sum. And 50% of the trade deficit is America's deficit with China, which is about $350 billion. So the big elephant is that. Big elephant is Japan, Germany and China. Whereas with India, what is forgotten is that our services are almost evenly balanced, total being about 40 billion plus. So when the trade crosses 100 billion, in that the services are evenly balanced. And this is despite all the negative actions taken by US with H-1B visas and so on and so forth. But what US doesn't take into account is what about the defense equipment that India buys? There are billions and billions dollars worth of equipment which is not counted in your goods and services. So I don't think with Trump it is not logic. Logic is not operating. It's Trump's own political approach to it, and there are gross contradictions in what he's done, and that's been pointed out to him. And then he's making exceptions in case of Canada, Mexico, others. So I think he's really created utter confusion in the global trading system. But from our point of view, as said in the beginning, which has been supplemented by other speakers, it's good to go to WTO. At least there is a rule book there, and if you go according to the rule, where he imposes duties directly, I think by then he'll get enmeshed with some other people, with China and so on and so forth, and then he'll hit a wall.
A quick follow-up to you, Ambassador Singh, which is, what do you make of India's position? We heard the Commerce Secretary today say that, with a typical nuanced Indian position, not hostile, not aggressive, saying that, we will present our point of view within the time frame of 2 months or whatever it is, and we'll present our case. And, do you think India needs to, it needs to realize that it can't deal with Trump the way it has dealt with earlier American administration? Should India also get a little aggressive? Should India have been a little more proactive? Or do you think it should stick with, basic diplomacy 101?
I think diplomacy is preferable. The experience with Trump is that if you get very aggressive with him, he'll get aggressive back with you. He's got other bigger problems on the trade plate. Let him get enmeshed there. We go to the WTO, we deal with it, and deal with it through back channels, deal with it through their Commerce Ministry, USTR's office, etc. There's no point getting into a public spat with him, because he is doing it for a political reason in America. The minute you get into a public spat, you'll get a Twitter attack back, and it can be anything. It may be logical, it may be illogical, then it'll be very difficult to spin it from there.
That's a very nuanced approach. You don't want to get into a Twitter war, forget a trade war with Donald Trump there. But Mr. Dua, is it not imperative that India should go on the offensive and drag the US to WTO over the tariff on steel and aluminium? At least our own, things are within bound rates. This isn't. I
think so. While I totally agree that you need to have, you're dealing with a superpower, you're dealing with a person who's unpredictable and an economy which is very large. But I don't think that we need to be silent about the violations of the WTO rules, which Mr. Trump is himself indulging in. And as I pointed out, the clear cut is his imposing these duties, which are all outside the bound rate to which the US has, as long as it's a member of the WTO, it's bound by those. We need to be proactive in pointing that out to the US, to the WTO and the world at large, that the trade wars are not good for anybody. Last time the world indulged in trade wars, it led to the Great Depression in 1929-30. Even during the Second World War, it wasn't a trade war per se. Countries at war with each other continue to trade. It is necessary because, and we have time. I'm pretty confident that we, by giving subsidies, which we are, whether they are of $7 billion applicable to 6,000 products or whatever the numbers, and these subsidies to our export-oriented units as well as in our SEZs, as of now, we are within the WTO regulations. That issue is being discussed from which year it should get counted, from 2015 or 2017. So whether it's 2023 or 2025, we have time to phase them out. So the US, by going to the WTO and having taken the first step of consultations, which is mandatory before you go to the dispute resolution board, the panel there, I think is not going to be able to succeed either in the consultations, and probably it will go to the dispute panel. And then, of course, we have the appellate body, which the US is stalling by not even nominating members, the judges to it, and its own member is not being selected.
Yeah, Ajay, I come in on that. The point that Ambassador Singh also made earlier, which is that in a way it's not bad that it's been referred to the WTO, because there's a process, there's a dispute resolution mechanism which is robust, and this matter will get the right attention. In that sense, is there no reason for India to panic just yet?
No, in fact, absolutely there is no reason to panic, but let us move step by step. If US has offered us for the consultation, why not we proactively engage with the US, try to explain our viewpoint, try to explain that we have 8 years phase out, try to give the assurance that we will be remodeling the scheme. To the extent we can bridge the trust deficit with the US during the consultation process is definitely better for us. If something remains, we always have the option to move to the dispute settlement body and explain our viewpoint. But I am of the view that looking into the India's business engagement with the US, the fact that US is our strategic partner, our bilateral trade is to the tune of around $130 billion, we have much stake in that. And though of course people are talking about India's taking a position on article of iron, steel and aluminium, I am of the view that India's export interest is not much in that product. We totally export less than $1.3 billion to the US. Of course, if other countries are taking US to the dispute settlement board, we can join that army, but I don't think our business interest at the moment guide us to take a position on that. I am of the view that looking into the current situation, it is better to engage with the US during the consultation process.
Final closing comments actually, and as we move closer to the show, Ambassador Singh, is it disconcerting that Trump is actually following his words with action? Has the international community at some stage misread Trump in expecting that he will bark but perhaps not bite?
No, remember, duties on steel were even imposed by President Bush, but he did it for a 3-year period. So he would do it when he has said something. Now, whether he is able to follow through or not, because these are his election promises. It's almost as if he has a list of whatever he's promised and tick marks between firing people and tick marking that. I think he remains fairly busy. As the Americans say, read his lips. Don't go by hugs. Don't go by what you think are your overall relationship. He does not approach it like that. In the moment, he is very friendly with you, but his election promises, core beliefs, he's going to continue to function till he runs into a major problem. And the major problem, as just pointed out, don't pick a fight with him, which is not necessary. He's given you an out, he's given you the WTO mechanism, engage them there, wrap them up, use up the time, make sure that you're able in the meanwhile to prepare yourself. As I said, I'm glad the food issue, food procurement hasn't come in, because that they had raised earlier at the WTO ministerial, and he's not going to give up on that either, because he will start pressing on that too. But that's dealing with Trump, and you have to be prepared to deal with him in multiple ways.
Indeed, I've just got another minute on the show, so 30 seconds to my other two panelists. Ajay Dua, you first. What is clear is that the US is not going to back off when it comes to trade issues, because he's catering to a domestic constituency. Should India and the world brace up, for an ugly trade war from here on?
I'm not so kind of pessimistic that Mr. Trump would follow up on all that he keeps saying, including in the matters of trade. He is testing waters. We have seen it in a number of other things, including on his election promises, that he ultimately gets down to be realistic. And I suspect that that's going to happen here as well. The matter is not so serious because it's now before the WTO consultative process, which can take time. I think we should engage ourselves constructively there, and maybe he thereafter may not see the need to follow it up to a dispute panel or at any point of time arbitrarily again hike up the duties, which will again give countries like India the opportunity to go back to the WTO and question the new rates of duties.
Mr. Sai, then a quick closing comment to you. You're someone who's got a skin in the game, really. What does all of this narrative, commentary, action of WTO, what Mr. Trump is doing, really mean for Indian exports?
Now, if you look at the trigger for the present crisis, started with the trade deficit. But we need to explain to the US that Indian civil aviation industry is quite robust. We have placed huge order for imports of the Boeing. As told by the earlier speaker, we are importing a lot of defense equipment for them. US has emerged as a supplier of petroleum goods. We import $80 billion of crude, so we can import it from the US also. So I'm firmly of the view that if we can explain these viewpoints, US will be definitely sensitive to the India's need. Secondly, the dispute which the US has raised can be raised by any member country. The fact is that we have graduated out of the protection which was available to us is known fact. It is something which the WTO has told us. So it's a different issue that US has raised the dispute. Any of our trading partner can raise the dispute. So I am of the view that for the present issue we need to be constructively engaged with the US. If we are not making any headway, definitely we can go to the WTO and we can make our viewpoint very clear there.
Constructively engage with the US and hopefully you will find a solution. That seems to be the consensus view of our panel. But we live in interesting times. Whether or not all of this is going to result in a trade war, I guess you'll have to wait and watch, because Trump is unpredictable. Completely out of time there in this edition of the India Development Debate. Ambassador K.C. Singh, Mr. Ajay Dua, Mr. Ajay Sai, thank you so much for taking time out and joining us on this edition of the India Development Debate.